This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Sign up using the link below and get free access to Nebula, where you can watch my original series, The New F Word. Episode 3 is available right now. The US isn't a democracy. It's a plutocracy. And most Americans agree. Today, we're talking about so-called liberal democracy. Let's start with a definition. Democracy comes from this ancient Greek word, and translates to either rule by the people or rule of the people. This definition is a little bit vague, so for centuries various thinkers have come in with slightly different wordings for the same idea. For example, you might be familiar with Lincoln's slightly expanded definition, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But there is truly a huge variety of definitions of democracy, all with their own unique prefixes and caveats. Ultimately, most definitions of democracy, whether they're trying to be universal or sketching out a more precise set of political institutions, are an attempt to realize the sovereignty of the largest group of people possible for any given society. Democracy is an attempt to give people the ability to decide what their lives and their society should look like, in contrast to a monarchy or a plutocracy, where one or just a few individuals would wield this power. Like any political concept, though, things get complicated when you move from the page to the real world. As with freedom, democracy can't be absolute. A democratic population can't abdicate its own power indefinitely, for example. Otherwise, it would be robbing its future citizens of democratic power. It can't remove decision power from any of its citizens in general, nor can it allow its citizens to remove each other's democratic power. It all gets a bit challenging when upholding one of these ideas conflicts with one of the others, in much the same way that freedom extends only so far as it does not infringe upon the freedom of others, and protecting that can mean limiting freedom in one way to reinforce it in another. The idea behind democracy is that it keeps this sort of stuff in check by ensuring power stays relatively evenly distributed between people. As a result, the decisions made in a democratic society should be reflective of the needs and wants of the population, and should generally be the product of that society's deliberation. But now let's look at the United States. There's a good chance you've seen this graph before. It's taken from a Princeton study on policy outcomes and voter preference, and it's one of the most direct pieces of evidence for the US's so-called democratic deficit. On the horizontal axis, you have the public support for any given policy, and on the vertical axis, you have the likelihood that this policy gets passed by Congress. In an ideal situation, the two should meet in the middle. If 100% of the public supports something, for example, there should be a 100% chance of Congress passing it, and vice versa for a policy that 0% of people support. But that's not what the graph shows. Using a set of nearly 2,000 policies across 2 decades, the authors of the study find that for the bottom 90% of the population, support for any given policy has no influence whatsoever on the likelihood of that policy getting passed. The line is flat. Regardless of whether the bottom 90% want something to happen or not, there is no difference in the chances of Congress passing a bill about it. But that's not true for everyone. For the top 10%, their support, or lack thereof, is critical. Congress more or less follows the interest of this wealthier group much more consistently, with the line for the top 10% of society looking a lot closer to the ideal scenario. When our country's economic elites don't want something to happen, it doesn't. And when they do, they have much better odds than the majority of the population. It's as simple as that. Your vote only helps pick which part of the wealthy population has a say. So far, this isn't all that surprising. Like we saw in that bar graph earlier, most Americans have gotten accustomed to the idea that the government doesn't represent the interest of the majority, nor does it adequately cater to the needs of various disenfranchised groups. People know who benefits from the way our government acts, hence why the slogan, "Get money out of politics," has strong support on both the left and the right alike. And while this is good, what's typically missing from the slogan is a clear understanding of exactly why the US has this bias. Getting money out of politics is great, but the US's democracy problem has a much more fundamental core. What is missing for democracy in this country isn't a few campaign finance reforms, or some guy coming in and draining the swamp. Nor do we need less government. The problem is far more structural than could be fixed by any of these ideas. No, the US will never be democratic so long as it's based on the existing constitution and sticks with a capitalist economy. What makes America undemocratic isn't just money in politics, but the structure of the government and the economy themselves. First, while we tend to think of representative government and democracy as synonymous, that is a relatively new idea. For most of history, representative government, like the kind the US has, was thought of as the opposite of democracy, not as the best way to put democracy into practice. This is because representative governments have the benefit of favoring those that are good at getting elected, or have the means to run an electoral campaign, or can curry favor with the right people. Representative governments can be molded to favor some people over others, by cutting up representation along geographic lines, for example, or setting rules that keep more radical voices out, like with age restrictions or a lack of proportionality. Throughout history, elites have therefore always favored representative systems when revolutions were pushing countries down the democratic route. Better to accept some democratic concessions, like universal suffrage, but contain them within institutions that could still be regulated by those who would otherwise be dethroned. Representative government was seen by the elites that came out on top as a way to quell the general public and filter its interests through their own, ensuring that the democratic zeal of the population wouldn't carry the revolution to the point of upsetting their newly achieved status. Founding Father James Madison actually put this anti-democratic nature of representative government in relatively explicit terms when writing the Federalist Papers, saying he preferred this model of government because it would, quote, refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens. In other words, representative government actively gets in the way of democracy and favors, unsurprisingly, the representatives themselves and the class interest they may come to represent. In the case of the US, right from its founding, that means favoring the owners of economic property, merchants and large landowners, who only made up a tiny minority of the American people. This class allegiance between government representatives and those with property was baked into the new government the US founded, with the Constitution protecting things like private property, the private ownership of productive resources like factories, farms, and businesses. Because the Founding Fathers knew that if given democratic power over more than a narrow set of issues, people's first instinct would be to dispossess the capitalist elite that was slowly gaining power in America and redistribute economic power amongst themselves, the people who actually do the work. As a result, the system of checks and balances that the Founding Fathers developed was organized not to increase democracy, but to protect the interests of this newly powerful bourgeoisie with things like the Senate, the Electoral College, the President, and the Supreme Court, tempering the most democratic body of the American government, the House, and the American people more generally. The Founding Fathers created this idea that the general public was too dumb to govern itself. That way, the new government and society they would create would guarantee the status they either had or hoped to achieve as owners of property, which in some cases meant literally guaranteeing their right to own people. And liberalism, with its commitment to property and the resulting anti-democratic privileges, would provide the theoretical backing for this new governmental philosophy. Although these systems are undoubtedly more democratic than the hereditary systems they replaced, they were still heavily limited in their attempt to reach the democratic ideal by the founders themselves, and it showed. It took centuries of tireless efforts and multiple uprisings against this system for the power of women and Black Americans to even be considered valid. Same with the violent strikes and protests by militant labor unions that earned all of us basic self-determination, with the weekend, the 8-hour workday, and vacation time. The original construction of the American government gave no democratic outlet for these policies to arise organically within its halls, regardless of popular support. It took tremendous democratic pressure from outside the liberal system in order for the American public to actually make change happen. And at the core of this issue of democracy is the capitalist system itself, and the fact that our liberal governments treat politics and the economy as if they were two completely separate things, in the process, allowing the economy to be governed by its own authoritarian laws. Take work, for example. At work, you have very little say about incredibly important things. You aren't sitting with the board of directors calling the shots on strategy for the next quarter. You don't elect your boss. You don't decide the safety of your working conditions. Rarely do you have a say in your working hours, and you aren't privy to things like how the company spends its money, especially on things like the salary of the people making those decisions. Most of the decisions about how a business is run, including those that affect you at a personal level, are made by someone else. someone who is unelected and who undoubtedly has more money and power than you. They will make decisions that serve their interests at your expense, knowing full well that because you need food, water, shelter, and healthcare, and you can be fired at any time, you won't fight back and risk losing your salary. You can choose to quit, but it'll take a lot to get you to that point, and this lets the capitalist make just about any decision they want. The same is true across the entirety of the economy. What dictates economic decisions are not the needs of the people whom the economy is both by and for, but the profit motive. If something horrible is profitable, even if everyone but a handful of elites oppose it, that horrible thing will continue. That's the case with fossil fuel extraction. At the same time, something that is necessary for millions of people may not happen at all if it isn't profitable, like feeding everyone. Feeding the poor is never going to be as profitable as overproducing for the wealthy. While democracy seeks to even out the power among society and make sure that people aren't able to coerce one another into acting against their own interests, capitalism structures society into a hierarchy, with more money giving people more power over others, and therefore the ability to serve their self-interests and punish entire sections of the population far beyond what a democratic body would allow. Ultimately then, capitalists are terrified of working people having as much power as they do. And luckily for them, the capitalist system isn't built to funnel money and power downwards. It's built to concentrate both in fewer and fewer hands. Whatever democracy may exist in some idealized primitive capitalist system that libertarians love to talk about, will eventually be washed away by the mergers and acquisitions that centralize capitalist power. When we on the left prioritize democracy and emphasize it so much, this is why. The capitalist system cannot do anything but corrupt democracy, whether that's by influencing government through lobbies, think tanks, and direct infiltration, or by constructing a separate realm of human life where democracy doesn't apply, the economy. Even though this mythical economy is where you spend most of your waking hours, and that decides the money you make for food, the price of shelter, and whether you get to keep your teeth or not, it is subject to the decisions of the market and the capitalists who occupy positions of power within it, not to democratic forces. It isn't just that our governments disempower the public through gerrymandering, or voter ID laws, or privately financed electoral campaigns. At the end of the day, the most determinant aspect of our lives, the state of the economy, is left up to forces that we know will happily crush the needs and interest of the vast majority of the population to satisfy the greed of a well-positioned few. Our democracies are neither by the people nor for the people. They are by and for the capitalist class. But it doesn't have to be this way. By bringing the economy under democratic control, the pressures felt by everyday people in the workplace can be reduced. So long as there is scarcity, difficult decisions will need to be made, and we won't completely eliminate the everyday stress of human existence. But the artificial stress of creating surplus exclusively for a class of property owners, that we can get rid of. More generally, governments could shift away from the parliamentary democratic model imposed on us centuries ago by slavers and landowners, and instead adopt a style of council democracy, or liquid democracy, to blend elements of representative government for those who prefer to temporarily delegate power, with more direct democracy elements for those who prefer to be involved. Workplaces could be run without management entirely, or with a group of managers directly elected by the workers. Constitutions could be drafted and approved by referendums of the general population, like is the case in Cuba and is starting to take shape in Chile. Positions within democratic institutions could be assigned by lottery, the way jury duty is, or by any number of other methods to ensure a more decent representation of the population. Central aspects of the economy could be planned or otherwise controlled to ensure that basic necessities are available to all, preventing people from using the threat of taking them away as coercion. There are countless ideas that could increase the democracy of our country, that could submit necessary decisions of collective need to collective deliberation, while ensuring personal decisions remain guaranteed. But at the end of the day, a society in which the freedom to exploit is guaranteed to those with property can never be a democracy. The New F-Word is a Nebula original series that explores the origins, characteristics, and resurgence of fascism around the world. Instead of taking the History Channel approach of focusing on the battles and leaders of World War II, the new F-word focuses on the ideology of fascism itself. Where did it come from? What is it responding to? And how can we identify fascism when it appears in the world today? Wherever you stand on the political spectrum, being able to speak knowledgeably about this dangerous ideology is critical, and the new F-word will give you the tools to do that. The first 3 episodes are available right now on Nebula. What you just saw is a little teaser for my Nebula original series, The New F-Word. I'm really proud of how it's coming along so far, and you can expect 1 episode per month for the remainder of the series. This show wouldn't have been possible without the support of CuriosityStream, who have supported Nebula's efforts since day 1. CuriosityStream is an established streaming platform with a solid track record of caring about great educational content and the financial security of those who produce it. They've got thousands of nonfiction titles from some of the best filmmakers in the game. As I've shared with you all many times before, YouTube doesn't treat its creators very well, especially channels with content like mine. That's why some of my creator friends and I teamed up to build Nebula, so we don't have to worry about demonetization. We're also super happy to be able to offer you this bundle deal, and get you all access to Nebula basically for free. Nebula is home to content from all your favorite YouTubers, all completely ad-free. Between the 2 platforms, there really is something for everyone, and by signing up at the link below, you're helping us produce more content like my original series, The New F-Word, which YouTube would never allow on its platform. Give CuriosityStream a shot, and get free access to Nebula when you sign up using the link below. It really does help support my channel, and educational creators all across YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like. If you hated it, a thumbs down. You can check out my previous content by clicking the links on your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.